Hello and welcome to the Greenwood SC Chamber of Commerce's webinar series. My name is Angèle Laborde and I would like to welcome you to today's session. We would like to start out by thanking Duke Energy, the title sponsor for our 2020 The Spirit of Small Business initiative. Duke Energy is helping to keep the spirit of small business alive during these challenging times by supporting their customers and communities with up-to-date information, financial resources, and community donations. During the presentation, your phone line will be muted, so you will be unable to verbally ask any questions to the presenter. If you would like to ask a question, you may do so by using the on-screen webinar sidebar panel to the right of your screen where the questions box is located. Just type your question in and we will answer as many questions as possible. Janet Balsiger will serve as a moderator for the session and will field questions at the end of the seminar. Today, we are pleased to host Ashley Cuttino, a shareholder with Ogletree Deakins law firm. Ashley is a management side employment lawyer and was tasked to lead Ogletree Deakins' national response to the COVID-19 crisis in the area of unemployment and is a part of the Return to Work specialty team. Today, Ashley will discuss the many issues employers may encounter as they bring employees back into the workplace and strategies to minimize risk in the process. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today. Please begin when you are ready.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar. If you have questions, we will try and address as many of those as we can at the end, or I'm always available after the session to try and address any questions that you may have. So we are going to go through several really important topics as everyone is beginning to return to work. But I did want to make you guys aware of some resources that we here at Ogletree are providing. This is the normal landing page for the Ogletree.com webpage. If you will notice up in the top right-hand corner, there is a red circle around the COVID-19 Resource Center. This landing page will actually take you to our coronavirus or COVID-19 resource page, where we have a ton of complimentary groups of information for you that are free for anyone to access. There is a really fantastic FAQ section that is updated on a daily basis as new information comes out from the CDC or from OSHA. There is also a section that you'll see circled in red that is closures and screening orders. This is really great, especially if you have multi-state operations, because it will give you real-time updates of all closures and all screening orders that come out. As more places open, we are seeing individualized screening orders. Of course, South Carolina is included on here, but it's just a really great resource page for you guys if you have follow-up questions or additional things that you'd like some more information on. We really have a ton of it on there. We're also publishing 4 or 5 blog posts a day about different issues with some deep dive into the coronavirus issues that we're seeing our clients have. So I just wanted to make sure you guys were aware that that resource was out there, because it does have some really great information for you moving forward. So today we're going to talk about return to work. I think we're all aware that the governor has started to open things back up here in South Carolina, and I would anticipate that when the current stay-at-home order expires, we will see more openings and more things lifted. So when we talk about return to work, we are talking really about 3 different scenarios. So scenario 1 is you have actually furloughed an employee and have temporarily laid them off with the intent of bringing them back to the workplace. You have laid employees off, in which case you have actually terminated that employment relationship in a formal layoff. Or maybe you have folks who are just working from home, but now you're going to bring them back into the physical workspace that is your office or your plant. So we're going to cover all 3 of those different scenarios today and the things that you need to be thinking about as you move through this. So one thing I wanted to talk about, though, is when you say that you've had a furlough versus a layoff, I do want everyone to be aware that hyper-technically in employment land, there is no real difference in the two terms. There is a difference, however, in the way people are applying them, but what matters is not what you called it, but what you did. So the term is not as important as the action that you took to put people in an unemployment situation. So for the purposes of this presentation, and generally when we're talking, a furlough, again, is when you put someone on some kind of unpaid leave, but you treated it like a leave. So you left them on their health insurance. You left their benefits in place. It's more like they were out on some other kind of, maybe an FMLA leave or something like that, an unpaid leave. A layoff, however, is when you have really severed that employment relationship and you may or may not be able to recall them to the job. You certainly can, but they may or may not have an obligation to take the job, depending on how you let them go in the first place. So the first thing I want to talk about is if we are in a scenario where you've had a layoff or a furlough, in either of those scenarios, you may be in a position where you have to decide who to recall. You may or may not be able to recall everyone at the same time as you begin to open back up slowly. So one thing we really want to talk about is making a decision on whom you're going to recall and when. We are already seeing cases come out and some litigation and some charges being filed about you picked employee A instead of employee B to come back first. So it's really important that you are thoughtful about this process, that you develop a business case for who you're going to bring back and who you're not. Maybe it's your critical workers first. Maybe there is a seniority status where you're going to bring people back. But you need to really have an objective criteria on who you're going to bring back and why you're going to bring some folks back before others. And it's important that you really come up, again, with a plan and that is a thoughtful decision on who you're going to bring back. Also, when you start bringing workers back into the workplace, you also want to make sure that you're giving some written notice that they're going to either be recalled or brought back into the workplace, whether that's from home or from a furlough situation. We're going to talk a good bit about some policies that you may have or some policies that you may want to at least temporarily tweak because of the return to the workplace due to COVID-19. But the first thing we do want to do is make sure that you are re-offering that job or the return to work in writing. And we're going to talk about why that matters later, which is if someone refuses to come back to work, and we'll talk about that. But we really do want to think through our existing policies and try and figure out if there are any that we need to tailor because of the coronavirus. So the ones that we are really talking about here that we would encourage you to take a particularly hard look at are your leave policies. So first, do you have a need to temporarily amend your sick leave or your other attendance policies? I think you need to be mindful of the fact that even when you bring folks back from work, you may have some people who get sick, who have child care issues, or who just have already burned all of their leave. So you may want to think about things like adding additional PTO or increasing the amount of PTO that someone can earn once they come back as a gesture of goodwill and or employee relations and or just to help people function better. Also, if you have less than 500 employees, please do not forget your new obligations that are only applicable to the year 2020 under the Family First Coronavirus Act, where you now have a mandate to provide emergency sick leave and emergency FMLA leave. If you are not aware of what I am talking about, please do go to the Ogletree page under the FFCRA, that's the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. There's some great information there that will give you a deeper dive into the emergency FMLA, into the emergency sick leave policy, but you will need to actually either have a policy or at the very least post the notice that is available for free on the DOL website. Again, you can go to the DOL website, and they have a new poster that you post right next to all of your other employment posters at work having to do with the new emergency paid sick leave and FMLA leave for those of you who have less than 500 employees or if you're governmental. You will also definitely need to look at your workplace safety policies and your workplace safety procedures, and we're going to talk about that in detail in just a little bit. Also, if you do have a layoff, a furlough, or a recall policy in place before this, that is the policy that you should be applying as you're calling people back. You also want to make sure you have good complaint reporting and an open door policy, especially as it relates to safety and health concerns that folks may have. And then again, you want to make sure that you have a good attendance policy in place and that you are keeping that attendance policy up to date and treating everyone the same as you apply that attendance policy as we move forward. For those of you who are having employees continue to work from home, you do want to make sure that you have a good work from home policy. That may include a special pandemic work from home policy where you are really taking into account kind of this emergency situation that we are in. You want to make sure that you're watching your cybersecurity while people are at home and working from home, and that you have the ability to record time, do monitoring of performance, do those kinds of things from a work from home scenario. There are some of you who will bring people back from a furlough situation, but what you will be bringing them back to do is actually work from home. So this may be new for some of you, and you really want to consider having a policy that talks about those issues. You must make sure you're paying people correctly if they're working from home, and you want to make sure that you can monitor that accordingly. We're also going to talk in a few minutes about new agreements that you may want to have. If there's ever a time for you to implement some new agreements, now is a good time as you're bringing people back into the workplace and back onto the rolls. So if there are things that you have been kind of sitting on, this is a good opportunity to put some of those things back into place. Think about things like a non-compete or something like that, where you are rehiring folks if you permanently sever that employment relationship, and so now would be a good time to think about doing some of those things. Also, for some of you, you may have had a change to your payroll or to your benefits plan as we all kind of did emergency measures to deal with this crisis a few weeks ago. The main thing we want you to do is go back and make sure you understand the steps that you took so that you can evaluate whether there are new steps that you need to take to either make sure those changes continue and or that you don't need to undo them. So one of the big ones that we have seen lots of people do is there have been changes to their health plan requirements, where before if you had a requirement, say, where someone had to work at least 30 hours, the health insurance companies were really great at working with people on a short-term basis so that they could keep their health insurance while they were on a furlough. You will need to make sure you don't forget to alert the healthcare companies that you have people coming back onto the rolls, and make sure there's nothing the healthcare company, insurance company needs you to do in that, from that standpoint. You may also want to make sure that your employees know about fringe benefits that you may have. You may already have a teledoc service. You may already have EAP counseling. There are some folks who have child care emergency benefits that are available already. I think it's a really great time if you have these kind of benefits to remind your employees that you offer them so that they don't forget that they're out there, and it's great for employee, again, relations and morale. And also, if you don't have these kinds of services, this is something that you may want to really consider. Again, putting a teledoc plan with your health insurance, thinking about an EAP plan. Certainly, we have seen an uptick in stress for all of us, especially if you're at home trying to work and, you know, homeschool your children and everything else. We're really seeing a lot of those types of services being used. So if you have them, I encourage you to remind your employees about them. And if you don't, I would encourage you to think about adding them to your plans either now or in the future. I did want to remind everybody, if you are in a unionized environment, don't forget you have a duty to bargain over recall, and you have a duty to bargain over safety. So if you are in a unionized environment, please do not forget to sit down with your union and do the required bargaining and negotiations over these two topics. Now, I know here in South Carolina, most of you probably are not unionized. Normally in South Carolina, we do not talk a ton about unions, but one thing I do want everyone to hear is that unions have taken the coronavirus as an opportunity to really get in front of employees and to show that they want to do good for the employees. And we are seeing a large uptick in unionized activity everywhere. So when we talk a little bit about things like masks that employees may wear, unions have actually printed up free masks that they're shipping out, and they have the union insignia on the mask itself. We're seeing all sorts of things like that pop up. So it is very important that right now you really think about not just getting your companies back to work, which is certainly priority number one, but you've got to get your employees back to work to make your companies thrive and survive. And positive employee relations is really critical right now. You need to make sure you're training your supervisors on what they can and can't talk about with their employees as far as the unionized workforce is concerned. You also want to make sure that you have a good open door policy for your employees to be able to come to you. You may want to think about doing something like surveys with employees or different kind of communication methods with your employees, because in this time, as you are bringing people back, communication is really going to be key to your employees feeling safe at work. And if they feel safe at work and like you have their best interests at heart as well as the work at heart, then you're going to be in a much better position and have many fewer fights about people coming back to work, about what they're going to do, and how the workplace is going to work and look in the future. We are going to have this virus in our community for some time, and so we've got to really make sure that we've got everybody on the same team and everybody rowing the boat in the same direction. And I really cannot overstate how important communication and positive employee relations is going to be over the next few months. So one thing I did want to talk about is that this is a really good opportunity for diversity and inclusion. If you have any kind of work group, business resource group, this is a great opportunity to use that group to get to your employee base. So, for example, if you have a family resource group or if you have a women's resource group, certainly providing some sessions or some using that group for just an opportunity for everyone not to feel alone as they're having to juggle all of the things we're having to juggle now is really great and is a good way to get that message out to folks. I would also encourage all of you to make sure, if you have any Asian Americans in your workforce, to make sure that you don't have any problems with discrimination towards that group of employees. We have, of course, all know that this virus started in China, and we have seen some instances where that Asian American population has seen an uptick in harassment at work and outside of work. So just be aware of that and be cognizant and make sure that none of that is going on in your working environment. And also, and I'm going to tell you, I totally stole this from Facebook, but I thought it was really great. So the coronavirus has put us all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. So you don't know if the person has children at home that they're trying to homeschool, if they have someone in their family who's actually contracted the virus, if they are trying to juggle this alone, if they've got a husband working at the other end of the dining table that they now want to, throw something at every day. This has been difficult for everyone in our own unique ways. So I think being empathetic to your employees is also really important right now as we all work through this next phase. So now let's get into some of the nuts and bolts about bringing people back to work. So if you have put someone on a furlough, you may or may not want to conduct a background check or a drug test again. I would question you as to why you would need to do this if they've been on a furlough. You have not terminated the employment relationship, and you have not had any kind of reasonable suspicion that something is wrong. So there's really no reason to do these things again unless you somehow have a truly highly sensitive workforce to these issues and that there's a real reason to do it. If you had put someone on a layoff and you have terminated that employment relationship, then you are doing a rehire. And in that case, you will need to follow your normal rehire process, and you may want to do these things again. With the background check in particular, if you had done one on the person not that long ago, you will need to look back to their form that they signed allowing you to perform the background check and see if you're within the date timeline in that form that you have to get their permission to run another background check, or if you can just run another one. Also, you may want to consider giving conditional offers of employment pending a background check coming back clean. I will tell you the way background checks work is you fill out a form, it goes to an agency, and then it has to go through the court systems. Most of the court systems are still closed down, so background checks are just from a practical standpoint taking a much longer time than normal. So we also have folks who are going to do conditional offers of employment pending the background check coming back whenever that may be. The same applies to onboarding and I-9 compliance. Again, if it's coming back from a furlough, you're not terminating the employment relationship, so you're good. However, if you did a layoff, you will need to do new I-9 compliance and E-Verify. We do have some special instructions because of the COVID-19 situation. You may now inspect the documents remotely instead of in person. So you could do a video conference, they could email them into you, and then you need to get the originals from the individual within 3 days for your file. But this does allow you to have some leniency in the in-person verification process. Also, if you have anyone here who's working on a work visa, please do be aware that H-1B, H-1B1, and E-3 visas for the specialty occupation worker, you can move them to a new work site, but you do have to report that to the immigration folks, and they have given a 30-day extension on the time period to do that. And you do want to make sure that these folks don't lose their visa because you're skipping that step. So make sure you're reporting any kind of movement of any immigration person to a different job site appropriately so that you don't lose them on their work visa. All right, so now let's talk about some other considerations. So if you have an employee who is returning to the office from working from home, it is important for you to make sure you have all of your stuff back. So if you don't know what they took home with them in the first place, you want to try and get a list of it and try and make sure that you know everything they brought back. This is especially important as we're talking about defending trade secret cases in the future. You're still going to have to show that you took care of all of your information, and you don't want to have any kind of data breach or anything else happening, or just lose the value of your own stuff. So you want to make sure you have it all brought back. I know at my house, when I'm working from home, I was able to take an extra screen and a docking station home with me. So certainly Ogletree wants those things back. That was not a gift to me. It was just to assist me while I was working at home. Also, you may find yourself in a position where you had folks who were working from home, and now you're not able to bring them back, and you're now going to have to lay them off, in which case you want to make sure, again, you are getting all of that kind of documentation, your computers, all of that back. If you are having someone who currently has COVID-19, or if our shelter in place order stays, we need to think about how we're going to practically get the return of all of that information or our computers or whatever the employee has at home. Also, if you had folks that were working at home who do not normally do so, Don't forget to check with your IT department to see if they were granted any kind of special access to work from home that now you want to actually cut off because they're now going to be back in the office. You want to make sure you're keeping control of that process. And so, again, part of it is making sure you know what people were offered to work from home and then deciding whether or not they need to retain whatever that stuff was. So now let's talk about the safety protocols that you need to be thinking about when we are returning people to work. I will tell you all, if you want to do a quick read of something that's good to look at, just this week, OSHA has come out with safety protocols for the meat packing industry. And I know most of you are not in the meat packing industry, but the issue with the meat packing plants that you've seen on the news doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it's a meat packing plant. It has to do with the fact that it's a facility and how people are interacting with each other. So it does give you good guidance on things to think about for a plant, whether it's meat packing or making cars or doing anything else that you may be doing. It has some really good guidance for things that we need to be thinking about. So what you need to remember is that OSHA does require that you have a safe workplace. We are seeing an enormous uptick in OSHA inspections in the workplace on a federal level. We're not seeing it yet in South Carolina, but of course we haven't really opened back up yet. But there's definitely a requirement for you to have a safe workplace. When you think about your workplace, the only way for you to really do that is for you to conduct a job assessment or a job hazard safety audit, for lack of a better word, where you walk through and you look at what each worker is going to have to do. And then let's assess that worker on a low to high risk scenario for interaction with other people. And then what you need to do is figure out how can you change or modify your workplace to reduce this risk and hopefully eliminate it. So what you're going to do is you're really going to walk through each job and you're going to think about the things that person does. So for example, if you have a conveyor belt and you have employees who face each other pulling things off of the conveyor belt, it may be that what you need to do is change your process so that instead of facing each other face to face, you have people who are lined up beside each other down one side of the chain instead of face to face. Or maybe there's a way that you could put some kind of divide between your folks, like a plexiglass divide. So if someone sneezed or coughed, it would not go into the face of the other person. We're going to talk in a second about masks. You need to be thinking about things like lining off the floor so someone has like basically a box that they stand in to visually remind them to keep the 6 feet distance from the next person over. You need to be thinking about all aspects of your workplace. So think about your door handles, your break rooms. What can you do in those communal spaces such that people will not be in there together? So let's talk about things like staggering our rest breaks, staggering our lunch times, making it so we put divides at the lunch table so you can't congregate and talk to your friends, opening up conference rooms for lunchtime eating so that folks can spread out, mandating that you can only have so many people in a break room at a time, providing Clorox wipes to wipe down the Coke machine or the copy machine. If you're in an office setting, think about things like asking people to keep their door closed when they're in the office. You need to think about your process and how you can best put divides between people such that they are more protected. And there's no way to do that other than to do a job assessment survey on an individual level. So once you figure out what it is you're going to do at your job, you need to make sure you are communicating that to your employees. And there are some things that you're going to need to ask them to do. So for example, here at my workplace, we are able to still come into our office. I'm in my office right now. I have my door closed. We have small break rooms here. We only allow one person in the break room at a time. They're basically like a Coke machine and a coffee machine. Coffee. We have Clorox wipes in there, so when you open the refrigerator, you are responsible for wiping it back down. That is something you're going to have to ask employees to help with. So you need to make clear what you're going to ask them to help with, and make clear what you are doing to help them be safe also. So here we have staggered work times right now, so we're not all here together. We're spread out more than normal. Everybody's working the same amount of hours, but at different times. You need to make sure you implement and you communicate the policies that you're going to put out as far as your safety is concerned. And it is a legitimate reason to have a work stoppage if you do not have a safe workplace, and there's a good faith basis for safety concerns to be brought up by employees. One thing we're suggesting is that you consider having a signed acknowledgement of the new procedures, so an employee can't say, oh, I didn't understand what was happening, or, you know, I didn't know that I was responsible for that, or I didn't know that they were taking these kinds of safety measures. So again, you want to make sure you're doing that kind of individual job analysis. It's also good to start thinking about how you're going to maintain a healthy workplace in general. So that's going to be things that are broader. So it's going to be thinking about who is going to be responsible for sanitation and cleaning. Do you need to bring in a different crew to do sanitation and cleaning, or do an uptick in sanitation and cleaning? Who's going to be responsible for things like wiping down machines between shifts, if you have people who use the same tools or the same machines? Who is going to be in charge of those kinds of things? You also need to make sure that you're putting someone in charge of this process. There needs to be a person who is going to be responsible for making sure that these things are being done. It is also important to make sure you have a person who is responsible for activating a plan for if someone actually does come back with signs of COVID-19 or a positive diagnosis once you reopen the workforce. What are you going to do? Who is going to track who that worker has been in contact with? Who are you going to send home in addition to that worker? How long are you going to send them home for? There are CDC guidelines out that answer all of those questions for you, and that can help you with those questions. But you need to have a process and a person identified to be the one who's going to do that kind of questioning and decide who else in your workplace may have been exposed. This can be low-tech, done with paper and truly someone asking questions, or it can be done high-tech. I actually saw an amazing 60 Minutes this weekend where the big automotive plants, they actually have gotten all of their employees kind of a cheap version of a smartwatch where it actually buzzes them if they're within 6 feet of another person wearing the smartwatch, and it actually logs who they've been in contact with, so they can automatically know who people have been in contact with if someone were to come down with a fever or test positive. But again, it doesn't have to be that high tech, but you do need to have a process in place, and you need to make sure your supervisors and your employees know what this process is going to be. So again, the number one thing we're talking about is implementing social distancing in your workplaces or in your plants, and really thinking through the best way to spread people out. Again, telework is still an option. Staggered shifts, increasing your physical distances, maybe even moving some of your machinery in your work areas around to spread people out, or so again, they don't face each other. Installing physical barriers, and again, doing some of those types of things that we have. And it's also important to make sure you're following, of course, your own industry guidelines. For those of you who may be in retail or some of those kinds of things that are opening back up now, we all are aware of the limitations on, say, the number of people in a building or the percentage of a building that can be filled up at one time. And again, the reasoning is to try and impose social distancing. You also need to be thinking about what kind of protective equipment and other supplies you're going to have available. So it is all right to ask your workforce to wear face masks. There are different kinds of face masks available that can be used. Everyone does not need an N95 mask or respirator, depending on what kind of job that they have. If you're going to mandate that employees wear these devices, though, you have to provide them. You need to think about that and the supply shortage we're going to have here shortly when everyone starts opening back up and start thinking about ordering these things ahead of time. Same thing with disinfectant spray, disinfectant wipes. You need to make sure that you're able to get these things and to provide it to your workforce. And you may have some people in the workforce that have a higher need for a higher level of protective equipment than others. For example, in a minute, we're going to talk about screening when you come into the workforce. If you're the employee who's doing the temperature check on everyone, you may have a need for higher grade PPE, personal protective equipment, than someone who's on the plant floor that can use a cloth face covering versus an N95 mask or something like that. So be thinking about the different areas that you have in your plant also. And again, when you go back to that slide a few minutes ago, the risk triangle, the higher you are up in the risk triangle, the more advanced PPE you may need to provide to that employee. I would tell you to be very careful about providing one level of PPE versus another without there being a really clear reason, or those who are only getting the face mask are going to be mad and think they're being treated differently than the N95 mask. So be very careful about that if you decide to do it at different levels, other than the person who's actually doing any kind of screening at the door. So again, very new, the EOC has confirmed that you may require employees to wear protective gear as an infection control practice. Again, if you do require this, do realize that you may have some folks who do have an ADA or a religious accommodation need, and those rules are still there. You do have some folks who are, say, allergic to latex or other things like that, or they have problems wearing a mask because of, say, a beard that they have. That's for a religious reason, then we need to talk about what kind of accommodation we can make for those individuals. Other things to consider, if you have a workforce that travels, please make sure we are thinking about not only what the travel guidelines and restrictions are where you currently reside, but also where you're sending that employee. You don't want to send the employee somewhere, and then when they get there, they have to quarantine for 21 days before they can see your customer. You also need to be asking if you're sending, say, a salesperson or a specialist into a plant owned by one of your customers, you want to make sure that that plant has implemented safety protocols so that you're sending your employee into a safe workplace. So it's not that you cannot have people travel. We are starting to open that up now, but you need to make sure you're thinking about where they're coming from, where they're going, will there be any quarantine requirements surrounding that, and also is the place that you're sending them a safe place for them to be sent, including asking some of your clients some questions from time to time. All right, again, we've now gotten special guidance from the CDC and the EEOC where we are now allowed to do some kind of testing on our employees that before would have been an impermissible medical test. Now, because of the imminent threat, we're able to do some different testing and screening than we were before. One of those is temperature checks, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Again, the other types of screening that are now allowed is you are allowed to ask questions if someone is sick and send them home. You're also allowed to actually test for COVID-19 if you are so inclined. That is now affirmatively, this PowerPoint was actually put together last Thursday, and on Thursday of last week, they actually issued guidance that you can test for COVID-19 if you can get your hands on a real test. You may also ask questions to returning employees. You can ask this on a questionnaire that you do when you rehire them or bring them back to the workplace, or you can actually ask them a questionnaire every day. The questionnaire should be things like, have you had a fever in the last 24 hours? Have you had symptoms of coughing, runny nose, the CDC symptoms that we see related to COVID-19? Do you live with someone who has any of these symptoms? We actually have a situation right now, it's in South Carolina, where an employee was brought back to work. They filled out a questionnaire, but the questionnaire did not ask the question, do you live with anyone with any of these symptoms? The employee was living with someone who was positive for COVID-19, and then that live-in actually brought them lunch to the plant, and so now we have an issue that we have a possible exposure at the plant. So we need to be questioning our employees about their exposure and their symptoms, and again, that is now allowable by the EEOC as long as the pandemic is in place. So temperature check. You may do a temperature check on your employees every day when they come into your plant. There are multiple different kinds of thermometers out there. There are multiple kinds of thermometers that you can use. You need to be making sure that you have people who know how to use the thermometers, who are following proper safety protocols. So if you're using one of the ones that roll over your forehead, you got to clean that every time. If you're sticking a thermometer in somebody's ear with the little ear gun, you got to make sure you're using the individual shields that you use. This PowerPoint is a picture of one of the radar guns. You can use one of those. You also need to be thinking about things that are very practical, like where are you going to temperature check everybody? Are you going to do it inside the gate? Are you going to do it outside of the gate? We have lots of clients who've set up through rental companies some tents outside of their workplace so that they can do temperature checking outside of your workplace before they enter the building. Now, when you think about that, there are two other things you really need to think about. So do you need to have staggered start times for people? Because if you have a plant with 500 people on shift, you can't have 500 people waiting in line to get in one at a time, or you're not going to get your shift worked. So how many screening stations do you need to have? How long is it going to take everyone to get through the screening stations? How do we monitor and make sure we can do social distancing in those screening stations? And also, are you going to pay folks for the time that they are in that line? There is a de minimis exception to the donning and doffing kind of rules. That's where this falls. If it takes 5 seconds for someone to get a temperature check as they walk in, that's probably de minimis. But you need to be thinking about that also, and how long is it realistically going to take people to get through the line and fill out a questionnaire if you're having them do a daily questionnaire before they come to work. So again, what are you going to do if an employee becomes sick? Well, the first thing you have to remember is that you need to inform your work population and those who are in actual contact with that person, but you must maintain confidentiality. You do not identify the person. So again, this goes back to having one key resource in your workspace that's in charge of tracking down who has this person been in contact with, who else do we need to send home, who else do we need to tell about this. I would encourage you to inform your workplace if you have someone who is positive for COVID-19. Now, we're also in allergy season. I will tell y'all, I have a dry cough. My nose is running. I don't feel that great. I don't feel that great every year this time because I have bad seasonal allergies. You've got to be cautious of who has actually got a temperature, who's getting these symptoms, who are you going to send home, who are you not. You don't want to tell everybody that someone is positive for COVID-19, and you also don't want to start a panic. So we had someone here a couple of weeks ago who had a positive potential exposure. They were not positive at the end of the day, but that person, while they worked for my organization, they worked 3 floors below me. I had never come in contact with that person. I don't know who it is now. There was no reason. I don't share a bathroom. I don't share a break room. At most, I may have shared an elevator with them. Was I told there was an exposure? I was. Do I know who it was? I don't. Was I one of the people that was sent home precautionary? I was not, because I had no actual exposure to them. And there are protocols for who you would and who you would not send home. You also need to be very aware that for the first time you may be collecting medical information about your workers that you did not have before, and there are privacy issues associated with that. So make sure you have a privacy plan. Make sure you think through and determine what are you going to keep, what are you going to record, what do you not think is necessary. So on one hand, recording everyone, you may want to do. You don't have to. If you temperature check everybody going through the building and everybody comes out with a normal temperature, why do you need to record it? Now, if I pop up positive, you would certainly want to record that for me and keep a record of that. But do you want to keep a record of all of it, or do you want to keep a record that you were actually doing it? So you need to think through those kinds of things. There are options here for what you can and can't do, but whatever you collect, remember that you do have privacy obligations. You must maintain it in a confidential manner. You would maintain it like you would an FMLA file, where it would be separate from their personnel file in a medical folder, so that it's somewhere different and apart from the regular files, and you would limit who has access to it. Other things to consider as you're bringing folks back to work, you want to make sure that if you are actually rehiring someone, that you know whether or not you have to file a return to work notice with your unemployment agency. Do double check that. It's the same form that HR normally fills out when they hire someone new, but depending on how long the person has been out, they may want you to refill out this form to make sure they have a record that they are back to work. Other questions that we're getting now that are pretty common is, if I bring an employee back at reduced hours, are they eligible for unemployment? The answer to this question is under state unemployment, the answer is maybe. So under state unemployment, if you bring someone back from a partial unemployment scenario, in South Carolina, they have to make less than their maximum weekly benefit amount to be eligible for unemployment. So if you want to bring folks back part-time, if they earn less than their individual weekly wage amount, then they can get unemployment on top of that. And for the next, 2 months until the end of July, they will also get the additional $600 on top of it. So if you're talking about bringing people back in part-time, this will allow them to collect unemployment on top of that if you keep them below their weekly benefit amount. Other issues that we have, what if an employee refuses to return to work? Then what do you do? So there's an analysis that you need to go through. The first question you need to ask yourself is there an ADA issue? Does the person have an underlying condition that truly does make it more dangerous for them to come back into the workplace? If that answer is yes, then you have to follow your normal ADA protocol and look to see if there's a reasonable accommodation that you can follow. You need to have the doctor tell you whether or not it is reasonable for them to be out due to a medical condition. If the doctor does not certify that, then there's no ADA issue and you would follow your normal disciplinary procedure, and you have the right to ultimately terminate them if you so choose. So what if the issue is a child care issue? Well, then you need to ask yourself, do you or do you not have less than 500 employees? If you have less than 500 employees, remember the Family First Emergency FMLA will apply, and you will have to put that person on an FMLA emergency leave and pay them for it. It's a paid leave. If that answer is no, there's no child care issue, then again, you follow your normal disciplinary procedure and terminate. I will tell you again, we've seen a large uptick already in claims that are basically, for lack of a better word, motherhood claims, which is with schools being closed and daycares not yet reopening, people have to stay home and take care of their kids. They have to. So remember, if you have less than 500 employees, you are covered by this new FMLA rule. If none of this applies and you have someone who's just refusing to come back to work, you should report that to unemployment, because they will stop paying them unemployment. You can't just quit your job to get unemployment, especially right now where you potentially could be earning more on unemployment than you would be at home. In South Carolina, there is a special return to work form under the employer portal that you would fill out in that scenario, and then you would let unemployment take it from there. I'm not going to go over this slide in detail because it's not really the topic we have today, but this slide does give you the basics for those, the Family First emergency sick leave and the emergency FMLA leave, and what you have to pay employees if they're on the emergency FMLA leave. Remember, the only scenario that occurs in is if the child's school or daycare is closed and that the employee cannot work or telework from home. So if they have the ability to work or telework from home, they're not eligible for this, and they get paid at 2/3 their regular rate of pay plus, but that's capped at $200 a day. On this slide, you'll see that if you're in that scenario, it's paid leave for 3 to 12 weeks. That is true, but don't forget to look on the other side of the column. The first 2 weeks are actually also paid, but they're paid under the emergency paid sick leave. You just want to take it out of each bucket so that you don't have even more sick leave available for the person at the end, and you're basically exhausting both of these buckets, but they do get the full 12 weeks. All right, one other thing I did want to make everyone aware of is that South Carolina actually does have an employment law about isolations and quarantines that prevents an employer from firing or demoting or otherwise discriminating against an employee who is complying with an isolation or a quarantine order. So basically follow the governor's order, and if you're under a mandatory order from the governor and or a medical professional that you must quarantine, and that is usually if you're sick or you have an actual exposure, then there is a law in South Carolina that actually does protect you. And I think most people don't even know that this one exists. Again, can an employee quit just to collect unemployment benefits? The general answer to that is no. The Department of Labor and our state unemployment agency have made clear that that is not an option. The only scenario in which there are exceptions is if there's a reasonable good faith belief because they have an underlying condition that makes them more liable and have a higher health risk, and or if you're not making your workplace safe. If you're not putting in any of the protocols we talked about earlier, then that would provide a reasonable basis for their fear. Also, do not forget that pandemic unemployment insurance is a separate bucket of money that the federal government provided. So if an employee is not eligible for unemployment under our state system, the employee may still be eligible under the pandemic unemployment insurance system. So the reason that matters is because your employees may choose to stay on unemployment if they can get unemployment through this PUA system, but it does not come out of the bucket of money that you paid into the system. And again, if someone is collecting unemployment, then they have quit, and you should treat them as such. So this slide just gives you the scenarios where pandemic unemployment insurance is allowable. So for example, someone could get pandemic unemployment insurance if they are sick or taking care of someone who's sick with COVID-19, if they have children at home. All of those things would be excluded for unemployment in South Carolina, but they are covered under the new pandemic unemployment insurance plan. Again, some other just high notes to hit here at the end so we have a few minutes for questions. If you're not able to bring anyone back, make sure that you are complying with WARN notices. Again, you may not need to issue a WARN notice, but if you have to lay off more people, the count of the WARN layoff rolls backwards to include all of the people you've laid off in the 90 days. So if you have to keep laying people off, just don't forget that WARN is out there and you may have WARN obligations that arise as this continues. Also, make sure that you're paying attention to your impact on your PTO. In South Carolina, there's no obligation to pay out PTO, but if your company policy says that you will do so, you must do so. So if you have people who are currently on a furlough and you did not pay out, but now you realize you cannot bring them back and they need to be moved to a full layoff, don't forget to look back at your termination type policies to make sure you don't need to do things like pay out your PTO. Same thing for your severance plans. Do you have any kind of severance plan that would be triggered because of a termination or a permanent layoff? Also, do you have anyone that you would maybe like to issue a severance plan from to get a full release to make sure that there can be no lawsuit coming back at you on the back end? You may want to think about those types of things if you have to, again, continue to lay off folks as this continues. Again, if you do decide to get a release, you just want to make sure you get a release for everything that is possible. And also, please don't forget, for the same reasons, to think about your COBRA benefits, your welfare plans, 401k. Again, if you have people who are on furlough and now you're laying them off, just don't forget about your basics and your ABCs of termination. Just because they've been on a furlough, it does not mean that those things and those obligations have gone away. So just don't forget. I think this is a crazy time for folks, and it can be hard to remember who's on what plan and who's on what schedule. And so just make sure that you're doing those things as a wrap-up. Two things I did want to remind you all of again. Again, we do have this Coronavirus Resource Center on Ogletree. It has, again, lots of great resources for you. And then finally, we actually do have a return to work guide that we've prepared for clients. It is a product where it has all of the forms, all of the questionnaires, all of the notices, all of the different things that you would need for your employees. Again, the questionnaires, the notices, anything that I talked about in this presentation that was a form or a type of screening, all of that is gone through in great detail. If you have any interest in that, just let me know. But at this point, I will really be glad to take any kind of questions that y'all may have through the question seminar. I think we have 3 or 4 minutes left, and I'm going to take a sip of water since I've been talking nonstop, and we'll take a few questions.
Okay, just as a reminder, if anybody needs to ask a question, you can type that in the chat box. It should either say chat or questions, and they will come directly to me. As of right now, we've only got one, and it's just asking if you will provide the website again for the COVID-19 poster that you hang in the workplace. I think she's talking about that poster.
So I think that is the Family First coronavirus poster. And hold on one second. I don't think I have a slide with that poster on it, but if you go to dol.gov, the Federal Department of Labor website, and put in posters, it will pop up for you, and it is one that you can just print straight out. And I believe it's also on our coronavirus page also, but the DOL has it. Just put in poster, and it will pop up for you. And again, it is the emergency FMLA and the emergency paid sick leave poster is what you're looking for.
And if there's any more questions, y'all want to go ahead and send them in because that's the only one we have right now. So I'll give y'all a couple of seconds if you've got to type anything up. You can also raise your hand if you need to, but I don't see any hands raised for us to call on anybody.
Well, I hope that this session was helpful for you guys. It is certainly great that we're beginning to get the economy back going, but do be mindful of your health and safety obligations and how you're going to do this in a safe way. We are anticipating that there's going to be a lot of litigation coming out of this. We've already heard the plaintiffs' bar talking about different ways they're going to go after things, including that act I talked about. So make sure you're doing the things to keep your employees and your customers safe as you bring people back into your workplace. And I do wish you all luck as you get going, and we hopefully get everybody back to work here quickly.
Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us, and everybody who was on the call, thank you for joining. You're going to receive a follow-up email that's going to contain a survey. Please fill this out. It helps us provide you with valuable programs and webinars that will meet your needs. Also, a recording of this presentation will be attached. There will also be recordings uploaded to the Chamber website under the COVID-19 resource page, and you can also locate those on our YouTube channel. Thanks, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful day.